Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, sister. So you've written into us about an addiction that you have and how you might try and overcome the addiction. And you did specifically mention mindfulness as a potential here. So this is something that I'll explain in a bit more detail, but just to go through a few different approaches that people might take when trying to overcome an addiction. So it's commonly said that trying to find alternative ways to satisfy the need that the addiction is born of is probably the best place to start. So finding what need it is that this addiction is fulfilling and finding other ways to fulfill that need. So I'm just going to draw on probably a more common example. You don't state exactly what your addiction is, but I'm just going to refer to the example of smoking because this would probably be one of the most common addictions. So for example, if somebody smokes as a means to overcome stress, I know this is something that people do commonly. They turn to smoking when they're feeling stressed. So smoking in this case would be a means to combat stress. So to overcome smoking, one approach might be to find an alternative way to meet this need by finding other ways to manage the stress. That means that you would not turn to smoking. So this is one thing to consider with your particular addiction. Try and figure out what it is exactly that you are trying to fulfill the need of with your addiction and find alternative ways to manage this need that doesn't lead you to turning to your addiction. And you have specifically cited mindfulness as something that you'd be interested in exploring as a means to manage your addiction. And mashallah, mindfulness is one of the more recent trends that people have turned to as a means to really overcome any type of psychological difficulty. And it takes quite a different approach to more traditional methods. Traditional methods look at trying to modify thoughts and change thoughts as a means to, in this case of addiction, overcome the addiction. Whereas mindfulness takes a different approach of actually accepting the thoughts one's having rather than trying to change them. So in some techniques, used more traditionally and actually still used very commonly, you look at the thought processes that are involved in the addiction. So looking at what thoughts you're having and how this leads to having certain feelings, which then turns to the addictive behavior, which links into the last point I made there as well regarding finding alternative ways to meet the needs that the current addiction is fulfilling. So according to this one particular approach, you'd look at the thoughts that you're having and how this leads you to have certain feelings, which leads you to your addictive behavior. So going back and thinking and looking at the thoughts that you're having that ultimately lead you to your addictive behavior and changing these can help you to move away from the addictive behavior. But with mindfulness, this takes a very different approach in that it encourages you to actually accept the thoughts that you're having. And the reason why this can actually be helpful is because instead of pushing thoughts away, which can actually be very difficult and can actually only make them even stronger actually, because if you think about it, the more you try and think about something, or the more you try and push a thought away, the more you actually have the thought. And therefore you don't really kind of move on from the thought because it's constantly in your mind and you're trying to push it away, but actually it is just making it worse. So with mindfulness, this just encourages you to instead say, okay, this is the thought I'm having and I accept that I'm having it. And by accepting it and allowing yourself to think about it, this instead allows the thought to pass. And because the thought passes, then the feelings associated with it also go with this, and the behaviors would also disappear as well, according to this as well. So ways to practice mindfulness then, you can implement it in all aspects of your life, and this will help it to become more easy to implement when it comes to your addictive behavior as well. So for example, with anything, even just now as you're sitting, take time to think about and concentrate on your senses. So what are you seeing? Pay attention to the colors you're seeing, any patterns you're seeing. Think about what you're smelling. Take a moment to concentrate on what you're smelling. What can you smell? Is it fresh air? Is there cooking? Is there a perfume or something like this? Then pay attention to what you're hearing as well. Is there any kind of background noise? Are you outside? Can you hear the birds? Are you at home and you have children at home and you can hear them talking? Can you hear some kind of subtle buzzing from some kind of electrical equipment? Really, it's just about taking time to pay attention to your senses in this case, but also take time to think about and notice the thoughts and feelings that you're having as well. And instead of pushing them away, even if they're bad thoughts, even if they're difficult thoughts, even if they're thoughts of your addiction and when you're next going to fulfill your addiction, don't push them away. Allow yourself to think about them and feel the feelings that you're feeling and allow it to pass rather than pushing it away. So may Allah make it easy for you, and may He help you to overcome your addiction successfully, and may He grant you a life of happiness free from your addiction, a life that will be satisfying to you, satisfying to Allah in both this life and the next. Ameen.